Hi, everybody. Welcome to our 2024 Observability and Performance Virtual Roundtable. I'm Jesse, Chief Technologist here at DZone. We are so happy to have you all here and dive into the exciting topic of observability. I've got some experts joining me today, a panel here that I'd love to introduce. If you can, just wave, Siri. Software engineer over at Microsoft, Laharu, Manager of Information Security at Fortitude, Moti, CEO of vFunction, and Liz, Field CTO over at Honeycomb. We're so glad y'all could join us today. So first off, why observability? Cloud architectures have become increasingly complex. I feel like I say that every year. So all of the supporting structures around it continually get more and more complex year over year. So we need to make sure that our applications stay highly performant. Performance management, monitoring, they're sufficient in theory, but those alone do not achieve the availability and scalability demands of the current marketplace. So this is where observability comes in. Across the software ecosystem, observability has fully disrupted standard performance monitoring and management practices, enhancing those approaches with more sophisticated, data-driven, and automated insights so your organization can identify anomalies and incidents across a wider array of systems. Our team here at DZone wanted to explore these concepts further, and we have an annual observability and performance survey that you can download today on dzone.com called Observability and Performance, the precipice of building highly performant software systems. So for the next half hour or so, we're going to dive into these research findings with this panel of experts. We're going to look at key data points, themes, and discuss how it relates to the experiences of developers and software professionals like yourself. So let's get into it. First of all, we kicked off our research by measuring observability maturity levels at their organization. So think of like an old school capability maturity model. So we gave the following classifications: monitoring, right? Basic health of individual components; observability, observing system outputs for behavioral type insights; casual observability, get this one, determining problem cause with deeper insights like topology changes and stack changes; and then proactive observability. This is kind of getting into using more AI, ML, getting some models with monitoring and insights to find patterns. So oftentimes our research proves that large companies are more likely to adopt the higher end technologies and methods, primarily due to the resources that are available, right? So it was unexpected that significantly more respondents at large organizations, 50%, said their organization is only at the monitoring level than others in smaller companies. Fewer respondents at small organizations said they're only at the monitoring level. They were at higher levels. So I'm wondering why. So what do you all think about that? And Lahur, why don't you kick us off?
Awesome. So practically speaking, like resources abundance doesn't really equal to strategic prioritization sometimes. So large organizations may have a lot of teams, a lot of finances, a lot of tools going around, but they're often put in silos that might prevent them to basically cohesively adopt observability as a unified platform. And one thing that I've seen is large organizations usually have legacy components in them, or basically legacy systems. So making integration of the observability technology is a bit harder than budding or startups, as I may.
Okay. And Moti, agree, disagree?
Yes, if you think about it, these large organizations, I mean, observability is a very intrusive kind of piece of technology. You need to put something, right? Whether it's open telemetry or whatever other agent, right, on many nodes, on many servers. The larger the organization, the more intrusive, the more friction you have in deploying such a solution. So I was pleasantly surprised by this number, because I think that the technology adoption cycle for these organizations is much longer. So I think that we're on the right path. Of course, I would have liked to see more, but I'm not, so on the negative side, I'm not actually surprised. I think that it makes sense. And the fact that smaller organizations are much more agile and they can test new technologies and adopt technology faster makes total sense.
All right, Liz, you're nodding your head. Agree, disagree?
I strongly agree. And I think that these smaller organizations, because they're competing with larger organizations, they need force multipliers. They need things to help them move faster. They cannot just throw headcount at the problem. And that's why they find observability to be such a differentiating capability. I think the other thing is maybe I would take a quibble with this, idea of monitoring being separate from observability, right? Like I think everyone is trying to solve the same problem of understanding their systems. It's just that kind of what got us to here will not necessarily get us to there. So these organizations that have existed longer, they're used to using this older technology and it's gotten them to where they are, right? Like good on them. And therefore they're a little bit slower to adopt what the newest generation is, as opposed to organizations that are starting greenfield where they kind of can just start from the best possible technology to begin with.
It's a great discussion. Last year I was making a joke about how old I was, and monitoring was a huge thing 20 years ago. Like logging and monitoring, it was a big deal. We thought it was awesome. And if you do it right, it can stay a big deal, right? For a long time. I love that longevity.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like observability 1.0, as it were, right? Like that has worked for 20, 30 years, right? Like why mess with it?
I love it. Love it. All right, Siri, what do you think? What are you seeing over there at Microsoft?
Yeah, I definitely agree with the legacy system part. I mean, with Microsoft, we have around Office 365, all these components, these have been for more than 10, 15 years. And observability has been there for a while. And if I have to migrate to, from monitoring to observability for these legacy systems, it is also about the incentive that I'll get from this, the resource allocations and so on. It depends on so many factors. So that is what makes it tricky. And the numbers, though it was actually surprising, but it is it is how the world is today. So engineering versus business priorities is all what makes sense. And I think that is where it gets trickier for companies.
Yeah. And it's been a long time since I've run developer teams, but back then, I mean, rolling something out on a system that's been there for a long time, it's tricky to Moby's
It's
point
tricky.
before. And so I did want to ask the panel. Oh, go ahead, Liz. Sorry.
And there's also a behavior change involved, right? Like when you're trying to adopt observability, this is not just about attaching a new agent. Sure, you can attach a new agent, but I think, right, like the thing point we were getting to is in order to fully leverage modern observability, Observability 2.0, you kind of have to have people doing custom instrumentation, replacing log lines with adding attributes to their spans. And that's something that requires developers to do something different as opposed to just like, right, like it's not just an infrastructure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's skills too, right? They may not have the skills on the team, and you people have to learn it. I get that, and that's kind of leading into this next question. So, for companies that are out there that are trying to increase their maturity around observability, I mean, y'all are experts in the field. What are some of the things to be practical for the listeners out there? What are some things that you would tell them as they're trying to move along that maturity line? And Laharu will start back. I'm going to cross y'all this way, so Laharu will start back over here on my left.
So one thing that I would like to say is, start from the foundations of monitoring. Collect your telemetry first, rather than putting in AI or machine learning just because you want to have that, or just you're chasing a trend. That's something that I would like put out in the table and see what others think also.
Liz, what do you think?
I vehemently agree, right? Like, you cannot just rub AI in the problem. So I think in terms of how to get people started here, the key thing is to not try to boil the ocean all at once. I've had several clients approach me recently about, hey, can we adopt, open telemetry and Honeycomb across everything? And we're like, hold on, slow your roll. Like, let's demonstrate value with, 2 to 3 teams that are, connected to each other in the service graph so that you get the value of kind of causal tracing, but not necessarily, you have to have tracing on everything in order to get value out. So yeah, I think incremental success, demonstrating value, having internal case studies, that's how you do a successful rollout, because then those people will teach the other people in the organization and you have the credibility to do it, as opposed to another death march migration.
I love it. And that's a quote. I just wrote that down. You cannot just rub AI on the problem. But we are certainly going to try today. So Moti, what do you think?
100% agree with Liz here. Maybe one other suggestion would be if you're rolling something new, right? So obviously ripping and replacing is always more difficult than if you're deploying, let's say, a new application, new services, then that is the opportunity to start gradually. But absolutely agree, do not try to boil the ocean.
And Siri, more at the developer level, right? Any suggestions?
Yeah, so definitely with the cloud world, I think the most important thing that is now is getting visibility across all your services, right? And traces definitely help there. And trust me, there are so many teams that get traces wrong even till date. So it is very important to get the fundamentals right. First, start with monitoring, then identify, and also SLO somehow help here, where you understand that there's a problem and you set an SLO, and then you see that which part of your systems are missing your SLO through traces or logging, and then fix the whole system as a whole, and then go to the next maturity. That is what I would say. So start with which ones are affecting your business through some of these objectives, then get those fundamentals right, and then move forward.
I really love that point about SLOs. I think one of the key things that hindered adoption of SLOs, at least when I was an evangelist for SLOs at Google Cloud, was that people didn't have the capability to debug them. But tracing and logging, right, like tracing and structured logging provide that ability to debug your SLOs. And then that kind of solves that chicken and egg of I have this new alert and it's saying something is wrong, but it doesn't tell me where, right? Like tracing tells you where. So you have to kind of adopt these two technologies synergistically.
Yeah, that's a good point. I want to go to our next talking point if I can. So it was super interesting whenever we were looking at tools, right? Tooling around observability. And we were looking at capabilities of tools. And the most important capability, according to respondents' ranking, was integration with existing tools or stack. So tight integration with what they have already. But it was closely followed by cost, shocker, maturity of features, and complexity of use, all having over 90% of the weighted score for top ranked capabilities. So compared to last year, 2023, only cost and complexity of use changed rankings, swapping places actually between third and fourth place. So not a huge change. When you're looking at tools and capabilities, how does your team or organization address those types of requirements? Like, what's most important for you to find in the tools that you're using to accomplish this task? So integrations, cost, maturity, features, and you can give me your answer from either the tool perspective or more. So what do you find most valuable in the tools that you're working on observability? And Liz, let's start with you this time.
So I do have to say that I do work at a vendor, but we also dogfood our own stuff. I think to some degree, integration with existing tools and stack, that is becoming a table stakes solved problem because of open telemetry. That is not a point where many vendors choose to differentiate at this point, aside from offering easier starter packs, because our goal as the open telemetry project is to push that integration upstream so that everyone benefits rather than develop bespoke things. But yeah, I think I would very much echo that cost importance being top of mind for our clients. They're seeing kind of pressure to consolidate vendors. They're seeing pressure to reduce the cost. And that's something that, things like dynamic sampling can help with. That's cases where, reducing the number of distinct signals that you're collecting, right? Like maybe you don't need both your structured logs and your traces if you folded your logs into your traces, right? Like those are some of the ways that we see people addressing it. And there's also this really interesting trend we're seeing of people storing their telemetry data on-prem and only exporting to a SaaS service what they need to process. And that's something we're keeping a close eye on.
Awesome. Moti, what are you seeing?
I think that the complexity and kind of training your people is a very important point that shouldn't be overlooked, because that kind of has, drags and kind of increases the cost and, adds more friction to adopting these types of tools. Of course, totally second what Lee said about integrations. But I think complexity is a very important aspect that vendors should look at, and of course customers are looking at.
Okay, Siri?
Yeah, so when you as a developer ask to migrate something, that is when you're like, this is going to be tricky. But I think I agree with Liz and Moti, right? With open telemetry, the source problem is solved, but the the part where it has become a little hard is there are a bunch of different tools to observability for you. You have Prometheus for metrics and Grafana Loki for logs, and then traces, Jaeger for traces, if you go the open source route. And if you go a vendor specific route, then you have Honeycomb, you have Datadog. So each one has its own advantages. Open source gives you less cost maybe, but with vendor, maybe there's a slight increase in cost. I think this is where the line is drawn. What is the complexity you want to take in? Now, if you go the open source route, of course, you have to hire experts there, right? So that is going to increase the cost for you. So how are you going to control all this is what I saw teams thinking. And that is
Got
where
it.
I think, yeah.
That's awesome. It's good perspective. All right, Laharu.
So one thing that I would like to highlight is if you really do go for a paid vendor, might be controversial, but you are set in for a vendor lock-in some of the time, right? But if you adopt standards like OpenTel, then you have the freedom to move around in that space, but use OpenTel to integrate. So that's something that you could look at. And also when you're adopting, you could always look at pilots, then try something out, see if it works for you, because the next company will use it, but it might not suit you. And something that people really forget is handling the growing volumes of data. So they really forecast for like 1 year, but then like after that, a couple of other systems come in, then all the forecasting goes off. And also high throughput systems, not necessarily high volume, but high throughput, latency sensitive systems. So these are some things that you can actually talk about. And also looking at pay-as-you-go models rather than having a set subscription or something like that.
That's awesome. Yeah, and you made a good point. And I'm gonna go back to something Liz said, and everybody seemed to agree with, where integrations is table stakes at this point. Integrations may be, but standards aren't, right? And there's a key difference in between those. So integrations, I think, is a little bit different than what you were talking about. We're going to get to OpenTelemetry next, but how our systems continually work together. 20 years ago, we were all trying to figure out standardized ways to do it. Which goes right to your vendor lock-in question, right? Is it a real issue or not? It's interesting. But I want to get to OpenTelemetry, right? OpenTel, we've been talking about that a little bit. Over half of our respondents said that they're using it already, right? Our organization is using OpenTel for managing observability. And another fifth said that they're considering it, which is huge. That's a huge number of developers and software professionals saying we're using this thing already, or we're going to be moving there, really soon. So large organizations, we're going back to large versus small organizations again to see if we can find some nuance here. Large organizations were the most likely to say their org already uses OpenTelemetry. That's almost 80%, 79, followed by respondents at small organizations at 61%. But mid-sized organizations were only 25. Super interesting. Keep that in your head. So better performance monitoring and improved observability were the choices. Those were the most commonly selected benefits of using OpenTelemetry, right? Now, the most commonly selected challenges were integration issues, right? Maybe not table stakes, and complex setup and configuration, incomplete instrumentation, and a very steep learning curve. So let's dive into the benefits and challenges with OpenTelemetry first. And Laharu, I want to hear from you since you brought it up originally. What do you think about the benefits and challenges, especially around the integration?
So using OpenTelemetry would definitely help out because it supports such a wide range of distributed systems. So it could have you could have cloud, you could have hybrid, you could have on-prem. So it supports a lot. And also it also, like, bringing back to my point, reduces vendor lock-in, puts in a standard framework so that you can push all that data to multiple systems and do your work if you prefer to do that. So that's my view on that.
All right, Siri, we'll jump over to you now.
Yeah. So I know OpenTelemetry has 4 different concepts, right? Exporter, backend, collector, so many different concepts. But it actually gives you the single pane of glass experience for your source. It is definitely helpful. But the challenging part is the native integration with clouds. For example, if you use any of the Azure or AWS, it's just a single click of button. The agent is on the VM. You just use their SDK and send it. So OpenTelemetry is starting there. So once you have that agent being delivered by these cloud vendors, it'll obviously become easy. But I think with the current scenario, because they are still integrating, there are challenges in understanding how this whole OpenTelemetry ecosystem works and migrating your existing workloads to OpenTelemetry. So I believe these are some of the benefits and challenges that are existing in the current world.
Okay. All right, Liz.
Yeah, a lot of our customers are clamoring for, they don't want to run their own OpenTelemetry collector fleets, right? Like they want their cloud provider to run them for them. And I think that's a completely valid concern. But I think with regards to, the organization size that you talked about, I think that makes complete sense, right? Like large organizations prefer standards. They have multiple vendors in place. They want one common telemetry routing platform that then routes to multiple different vendors. So Tel fulfills that. Smaller orgs that are doing greenfield, again, that makes sense that they might adopt OpenTelemetry from the start. But imagine you're an organization that started, 5-6 years ago, you're mid-size, you've been using Datadog this whole time, you've been using New Relic this whole time, and it's been meeting your needs. There, you may not have had a kind of motivating factor aside from the shock of a Datadog bill to force you to switch on to OpenTelemetry.
Okay, Moti, anything to add?
I know that vendor lock-in was mentioned before. I was kind of surprised that wasn't somewhere at the top of the benefits of OpenTelemetry, because that obviously, reduces the barrier for switching between vendors. So I don't know if anyone on the panel here has a take on why wouldn't that be one of the top benefits of
I'm surprised too. The other one that I'm surprised by is, why did people cite better performance monitoring as a OpenTelemetry benefit? That's a benefit of the platform downstream. You do not get magically better performance monitoring by having by adopting a better telemetry production technology, unless, right, like, you were somehow lacking the ability to get those insights before, and now you have them because the data was bad.
Okay, and what do y'all think about the integration being on there as a challenge, right? We said it before, we thought integration was solved. And I think a lot of companies may believe it's solved, but here it was really interesting. Boots on the ground they're saying that it's number one of the two main challenges for adopting OpenTelemetry. What do you think they mean? Is it a coincidence? What do you think's going on there?
I think it relates to that second one, complexity of setup and configuration, right? Like integration has multiple different meanings. Integration can mean, does it support does it support Spring? Does it support Flask? Or it can mean, was I able to add it to my environment effectively? The pain is in the latter, not in the former in general, in my experience. Although there are some rough spots, right? Like, for instance, if you instrument OpenTelemetry on the, and turn on the Redis auto instrumentation, you'll get a trace span for every cache hit. Is that a good idea? Probably not, right? Like, but, stuff like that, right? Like, so making the defaults easier, yeah, definitely something that we, have taken that feedback and are working on. But I think the kind of installation process is challenging for folks. And I think that's what they mean by integration, complex setup, and config.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Everybody agree? Anybody disagree?
Yeah, I definitely agree. And one more thing is, if you are a system that has been for 5 years, like Liz was mentioning, now there are exporters, but the exporter ecosystem is still developing, right? So are there still integrations available? For example, there is OpenTelemetry OTLP exporter to export OpenTelemetry signals. That means I have to be already in OpenTelemetry. Similarly, there are Prometheus, but the exporter ecosystem is still developing. I think once that becomes more mature, that is when integration will also become a little easy.
Okay. And we'll dig in a little bit more onto this OpenTel. There was another piece to this question that respondents gave us some interesting data on. They said that the use of OpenTelemetry was mostly for microservices monitoring. Either one of the answers was extensively with full system-wide coverage, or partially limited to specific services. But that feels significant to me. So in your expert opinions, what does this finding say about the platform and its impact on overall observability architectures in the field? What do you think's going on there? Anybody can just jump in.
Sure. So I think the motivating factor is what you led with, Jesse, complexity. Microservices introduce complexity. Complexity motivates us to solve that technical debt by improving our understanding of the n-squared problem of how n microservices interact with each other. Therefore, it makes the most sense that you would adopt open telemetry where microservices are concerned, and you might stick with, single host APM where you have a monolith.
Okay. Anybody else have an opinion? Okay, go ahead. Yeah, jump in there, Siri. Go.
So if you have a monolith, is observability needed? I mean, I don't know if that's a controversial take, but would monitoring be sufficient? That is where I would say. And with open telemetry, you also get these traces and logs and all these things. So that is why I believe microservices and cloud is why people are more using open telemetry. That is why people are actually considering it.
Okay. You're about to get me on monoliths. I'm a Java developer from the 90s, man. I'm a modular monolith beast. Moti, Laharu, anything y'all want to add here before we move on?
I think that also my previous comment fits here, which is these are also newer kind of applications. So it kind of lends itself to probably deploying open telemetry and the newer technologies. But first and foremost, no question that it's the complexity that is the driver. And there's no tracing in a monolith, right? Really.
I feel like you're not doing it right. All right. So if we're going to get to why, I want to get to why, right? The monoliths aside, if any of y'all want to jump on another call one time, we can. But how do we measure if what we're doing is having the impact we want? So I want to talk a little bit about metrics, right? So when we asked about this, like number of incidents as a metric of success had a much higher response rate than other options, 65%, right? Number of incidents. MTTR, mean time to resolution, had a significantly higher response rate, right? 57%. And then we had frequency of deploys at 39, revenue, back to the cost thing, at 37, and then mean time between failures at 31%. So taking into account, do we think that based on those respondents, that we're focusing on the right success metrics, both organizations and individuals, especially in regards to the total number of incidents and average time to resolve? Like, are we missing any? Or do you think these are the right ways to measure if we're doing it right?
I think it's a fine way to measure kind of observability 1.0 basic monitoring type stuff.
Okay.
But I think that if you're measuring that way, you're really negating the value of moving to modern observability and kind of advancing towards observability 2.0. The reason is that it's not just about your number of incidents or frequency of outages. It's about how productive your developers are. When you start looking at observability as something that unlocks your organization moving faster at scale, that is a lot more compelling than necessarily the number of incidents that you're having, right? Like the number of incidents you're having does play into it, in that if you're constantly firefighting, you're not shipping as fast, right? Like you're doing more toil. So if people haven't heard of the notion of toil, right, it's the percentage of time you're doing unplanned or break fix work as opposed to proactively working on your service and making it better. So I think this is emblematic of the audience that you surveyed being stuck in the 1.0 world, being stuck firefighting all the time, and therefore trying to just get themselves less underwater so that they then can start doing some of these more advanced things.
Okay. So a focus on shifting that maintenance versus new development back in the right direction. Okay. Like that. Moti, what do you think?
I'm kind of, maybe it's controversial, maybe not. Like, number of incidents is a great measure for the effectiveness, maybe, and success of the development organization, but it is not tied at all to your observability, right? Observability doesn't impact the number of incidents. However, MTTR is impacted by your observability tool. So if you were to ask me, MTTR is much more important if you want to measure the effectiveness of your observability, right? Number of incidents has nothing to do with your observability.
It might even go up, right? Like the better observability you have, the more incidents you might proactively declare, being like, hey, this looks like it's about to go bad, right? Like
Potentially, right? No,
let's not
yeah,
penalize people for creating incidents.
Yeah,
it,
and I
it has,
love that idea because it is really about making the overall system better. But there's that feel like you remember we can't take that human element out of how they're answering the question, right? They really do want fewer incidents, but what they're doing may increase it. I like that. Yeah. Siri, Laharu, what you got, Laharu?
So we've talked about the technology teams and looking at their metrics like MTTR, but what about the business side of things and looking at the customer side of things? So looking at metrics of customer satisfaction or how quickly you resolve or basically identify the root cause so that the issues don't really keep happening. That'll promote a lot of uh, KPI or basically SLAs or basically the customer satisfaction. Then again, promoting business and that side of things. So I think that's something that is overlooked with the large technical teams that are working on it. They basically forget about business and they talk about technology, but I think that's a lot happening there as well that we need to focus.
Okay, awesome.
So,
Siri, you got one? Yeah,
yeah,
jump in there.
one thing I definitely would love to add these metrics are error budgets, because if I, as a developer, know what my customer satisfaction, as Larry was mentioning, I also want to be cognizant that I don't want to decrease my customer satisfaction. So if I have proper error budgets and have proper metrics that do alert on this, that will give me, that will make me more cognizant, and also it'll help improve the systems is what I believe. Because if you're constantly hitting your error budget, that means you definitely have a system that is
Right.
not robust enough.
There you
So
go.
that is one thing. And then your change failure rate. If you're deploying a change, how much how much effect is that causing? If that is causing an impact every time, then there is something definitely that you have to revisit to make sure your developers are not afraid of deploying new changes and your customers are also not unhappy.
Great. All right, we're almost out of time, and I have one more. Well, you got a heart from Liz. It's awesome. We have one more question that's super fun. I want everybody to have a shot at it, and we'll go across my left. Lahar, I'll start with you. I want to know a little bit about what you think about the future of observability and application performance. I mean, we've talked about a lot of different things, and I know that we've covered some very practical things for people who are trying to increase maturity and make this thing work and deliver value to their organizations. But what does the future look like? Right? Taking into consideration the seat that you're in and what you can see, which in a lot of cases is going to be a higher vantage point than what a lot of our listeners are going to be at. But specifically, where do you think over the next year observability is going to go? And Laharu, we'll start with you.
Awesome. So I think edge observability will play a key differentiator if you can do observability and give insights at the edge rather than taking time. So latency sensitive systems, like I just explained. Also sitting at a cybersecurity position, where does those two come together? I could detect more cybersecurity incidents by looking at the performance degradations of the system or the errors than what I would do looking at the security logs. And also basically being proactive about the incidents, right? Detect the incident even before it happens. That's something that we strive to do at Fortitude or basically Brandix. And taking it a step further and alerting the business saying that your system is going to go down in 5 minutes and this is what we're going to do now.
Awesome. Very cool. All right, Moti.
Look, I'll give a subjective answer here. Obviously, I'm not going to be objective because I have a little bit of an agenda here because that's what we're doing. We want to take open telemetry to a new world, right? To a new audience, and that is the architects. We think that you can leverage open telemetry to document in real time, right? Manage and improve your architecture. And if you're actually monitoring how your architecture is drifting and you're able to simplify the architecture, that can really help you reduce the time to resolving issues, right? Many of the things that you find or the alerts that you get have to do with bad architecture. And the more complex the architecture, the more time it will take you to fix issues. So it's sort of, I think that there are other ways and other places to take open telemetry that are not being done today. So that's kind of how I like to shape the future, not only opine on it.
Oh, okay. I got you. Cool. Nice. All right, Liz.
Yeah, so I think with regard to this kind of prompt around AI, I think one of the cool things that I suspect we're going to see in the next year is people being able to, with Copilot or Q or other technologies, being able to replace their log statements with trace attributes and trace spans. And I think that's going to be really, really powerful for helping people overcome that activation barrier from getting from Ollie 1.0 to 2.0. I think the other phenomenon is, I think kind of the use of AI to understand things for you is overblown, because you as a human being are accountable for the system. The AI is never going to be accountable for the system. So my view is that the more beneficial uses of AI here are in being more of that co-pilot or tutor, right? Like to help you get a sense of what's going on in your system instead of doing the thing for you and leaving you even more clueless about what it did and why.
Nice. All right, Siri.
I think we as developers will get more visibility into our systems as we go. The reason being, at least 3-4 years back, traces was not something every developer would think of. At least I did not think of. And with these open source tooling, these constructs have become very simple and have become standardized, right? Now, I think what people will want to do is, or I as a developer want to do, is get better understanding about what is happening in my entire system, and that is what I'll be working on next. And I think that is what the future will look like. And then, as the rest of the folks were saying, once you have that much data, maybe you can use AI, but at least for me, it's long shot.
That's awesome. Well, thank you all. That was great conversation, giving lots of feedback to everyone out there. And thank you for all tuning in today for our chat. We hope you were able to get a lot of these insights and fresh perspectives from the experts in the world of observability today. A special thanks to vFunction and Honeycomb for supporting this time that we had together today. Your support is pivotal in making this event and the report a success. So if you're out there and you enjoyed our discussion and want to see more just like it, head on over to dzone.com/events and see all of our on-demand content. If you would just stay with us for 1 minute to tell us how we did, we'd love to hear your feedback. We're always looking to improve, and we'll see you next time.